G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic day and a brilliant start to your week. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. Of course, we'll be looking at the maps, we'll be comparing maps, I'll show you some geolocations, but on those maps, we're going to talk about some specific areas. We're going to look at some information I've been sent from the front regarding Liman, and we're going to, of course, talk about the deteriorating situation in Pokrovsk, what is really happening there. We'll look at a dam in Russia's Belgorod region that has been hit by drones and HIMARS, and there is an amount of water coming out of that. And we'll look at what may become further of dam or bridge strikes. We'll look at Russia's new nuclear weapon that they have released. Now, not only can it carry a nuclear warhead, but it is nuclear powered. Stay with me for a sec. I'm going to try and pronounce it. The Berezvetsnik. We will take that. We'll talk about what is the use of a weapon like this. Will it make any influence in this war? No. But why do you develop weapons like this? What deterrence does it give? Does it fill where there may be a gap in capability? So we'll do a bit of a deep dive on that as well. But I wanted to talk about something just straight off the bat, is the situation that Europe, mostly the EU, I'll put UK or Britain in this, but that Europe finds themselves in. And this situation that they found themselves in, it's not due to Putin, Trump, Xi, but it's decades of poor decision-making that has led to what we see as just the managed decline. The existing relevance is due to historical power, not current outlooks. If you want to have a good look at this, have a look at companies that are worth over $1 that have started up in Europe in the past years versus other regions in the world. What we've seen and seeing is a systemic de-Europeanization in Europe through suicidal policy, historical guilt, immigration, just disastrous energy sovereignty, whether it be relying on the Russians through to blowing that up and now relying on the US, and also the inability to manufacture, the inability to have entrepreneurship as well. Now, none of these leaders, from Starmer, Macron, Merz, none of them seem to be even attempting to turn the boat around. We're going straight into that iceberg. And instead, they are heading actively into what I'd refer to as the final blow to Europe as we know it. And these will be decisions cemented and exacerbated by a potential wider war. Wider war has impacts that last generations. 80 years on, calling the UK victorious in the world wars appears to be a bit of a stretch. Losing their empire, their influence, their identity, basically being occupied anyway. Now, these leaders, they seem to be hell-bent on another massive war and mass loss on a huge scale. Now, I have little doubt that if NATO did launch a full-on operation to push Russia back in Ukraine, that it would, after years, have some success doing so. But it would rule over ruins in the end. The actual cost of a ground operation against these fortifications, against cities, would be immense, and that any victory would likely be Pyrrhic. Yes, there is a gap and a differential in power, but we've seen a mass differential in power be able to lock into an attritional war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, of course, if you don't know what Pyrrhic means, it's at victory, but the cost is so large, can you really call it a victory? And I use in this Russia as an example, but I just mean any conflict in general would just be so incredibly costly that Europe itself would be changed forever. Now, this does not free Russia of the accountability of its actions or justify their invasion. But what I fear is that European leaders, they're willing to throw everything away before seeing the reality. And the endeavour of bringing Moscow to its knees, well, we might find ourselves on our knees there also. I honestly think there is a window of opportunity that would be unfair, it would be bullshit, but historians would look back and understand, well, it may have been a necessary evil. And why do I say that this would be a final blow? That's pretty strong language. Well, those that would actually sign up to fight, to defend, who would be wounded and killed, these would be European patriots, those passionate about Europe. And the cost of war would be massively overrepresented by the existing European patriotic men. And the people that hate their nations or hate the nation of they have migrated to, they would represent a much smaller cost in the end. We're already seeing in these states a fundamental demographic shift. There's some delay on this due to fertility rates between ethnicities being different, but we're already seeing it. Now imagine you have a war with millions of casualties with one particular group bearing a huge amount of that cost. Europe already doesn't look like Europe, but don't think for a second that is stepping into a huge war, that cost is going to be equally shared across the community. The demographic cost in the post-war attrition in Russia and Ukraine is going to be immense. This is not just from killed, it's the scars that war leaves on those who fought. Russia, they will have to lean much, much more heavily on Central Asian countries, and Chinese influence will grow, and likely the European Union will flow massive migration into Ukraine, leading to what may feel like an occupation of areas that the Russians never even got close to. Meanwhile, there's going to be a betrayal. This is one of my big predictions. There's going to be a betrayal and reopen trade with Russia to gain access to cheap energy and resource, and in an attempt to reduce China's influence and ability to gain this. All of this is, in my opinion, or has been, an avoidable mess that we've found ourselves in. But how far are we willing to go? Okay, let's actually get into this. Sorry for the 10-minute long introduction. So let's have a look on the maps. And I want to show you a couple of things. Of course, here's Ukraine, the center of screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. We turn on these two opposing arrows. You'll see blue check on this map, ground Ukraine has made in 24 hours, red check, ground that Russia has made in 24 hours. But I'm not going to speak just about this now, but we will go over all of this. I have a little gift that I'd like to deliver to my linear warfare bros. So, of course, if you don't know what linear or constant warfare is, it's these people that say, well, they're gaining 1 kilometre a day, so therefore it will take 2,000 years before they reach X. And what I say is, war does not work like that. But let's for a second take that it does. Willie, a bit of data that you might help you explain a point you made in your most recent video. On the 1-year anniversary of the Russian capture at Vuhledar at the 1st of October 25, the Russians had pushed the front line approximately 66 kilometres. The red dot was the furthest extent of that date. The distance from that dot to the eastern edge of Zaporizhia city is 76 kilometres west. Not a good figure for the linear warfare guys. So if they like to insist on linear warfare numbers, you could point out that Russia would reach the city by the end of October next year and capture everything south of that line. Obviously, this is not how that works. But that is what these kinds of claims insinuate. And this is very interesting to look at, is even the linear warfare bros. Now, war does not work like this. It can sit still, it can move backwards, it can go forwards, it can fall off a cliff. We often refer to it like bankruptcy. But let's for a second imagine the linear warfare bros and speak what he's talking about. So let's go from Vuhledar right here, the 1-year anniversary on the 1st of October, to the extreme out in this grey zone here somewhere. Let's talk 70-ish kilometres. Then let's grab this and drag it over here. That's not going to work like that. But let's go from the same position, close enough, to Zaporizhia, and we're talking maybe high 80s. So even the linear warfare bros maybe insinuate if that Russia can last another year in this war, and any economist or military analyst I've seen who I think isn't just captured in drinking the Kool-Aid bullshit of maintaining clicks on their posts, see that the Russian economy and Russian military will be able to last multiple more years. That's what you're insinuating in here. And that this southern region, if that gets then further pushed to the north due to a western flank, the actual military way of Ukraine recovering Crimea is slipping further and further away from where it was, particularly in 23, with the only ever military way of taking this back that was ever at least explained from Tokmak, and then split this in two. Okay, let's look at a few other things. I said I've got some information from the ground. So we're going to come into the whole Siversk area. Now, what we know is Siversk, Liman fronts, that these have somewhat met. This front line is likely behind in here. But let's look at Liman. Right here, we see a large amount of grey zone heading out. If we go from the extreme to the line of control, let's go bang on 10 kilometres. Now, I can't say exactly what was said to me, but from the ground, the Russian DRGs, the sabotage reconnaissance groups, again, sabotage recon's not really what they're doing. They're working more as just beyond the line, but they're working inside the Liman freight terminals, and that this has effectively cut off the loop around the town. Now, I haven't, just due to time zones, I haven't actually been able to confirm exactly what he meant by these terminals. But what I believe is it is the railway in the centre here. That's the only terminals that I can think of, see down the centre of the railway into here. And the loop that he's referring to is this supply line in and around here. So saying that this movement into Liman, and as we do know, some of the most credible mappers have been talking about that there are Russian forces on the outskirts of Liman. So we'll see how that then develops over the coming days. Of course, that is from someone highly trusted on the ground. There'd be more from that. I just don't know if I can share it yet. I'm waiting on a couple of replies. Now, this is from a highly respected Ukrainian page as well. I found this interesting. Guys working on drones, mortars, cannons, so artillery and EW, who are, of course, behind the line, don't slack off on combat duty. Of course, it's cold. But keep in mind that recently there was another incident with Sabotage and Recon Group, DRG. The enemy got into the gun crew's dugout about 7 kilometres away and shot them like kittens. And what he's referring to here is the porosity of the front line. Don't slack off. Even if you're back on an artillery line some 7-10 kilometres back, you might have soldiers right up onto that position with how the front line is looking. I found that very interesting. That's something we do see, particularly up in this direction, but as well down around Velika and Vasilka as well. Okay, so let's look at the Belgorod Dam. We'll show you where it is. I'll show you some images. So we see this image here, and what we see is Ukraine has actually attacked this reservoir dam again, this time using HIMARS and drones, and the spillway has started releasing a significant amount of water, leading to substantial flooding in the surrounding areas. Now, again, HIMARS attacking a dam. You've got to be apparently a conspiratorialist, but you'll see that back when the counteroffensive started, there may have been another dam that was allegedly hit by HIMARS. We have a little bit of footage of this dam here, releasing a fair bit of water. The extent of the flooding and damage at this point in time is difficult to assess. But where actually is this? Well, we'll see where these two towns are to the east and west of it. But what I'll do is I'm going to zoom out onto the map and show you. So we have Gorafovka and Bezluadovka downstream of this, where there has been reported some flooding, and that this is, of course, you can see the international border into the Kharkiv Oblast. Let's do a very rough measurement of this, some 25 kilometers back. Of course, these are firing much further than this. But again, something very interesting on this is the Seversky Donetsk River. This does run basically north to south and does then run a lot of the water that runs into somewhere like Donetsk. Many have claimed that this is an incredibly important river to maintain control of, but it also could work potentially as a bit of a natural barrier if there is movement on negotiations and where the maximalist demands of Putin and Zelensky are sitting. And the demands that are released are large. I use the words maximalist. I shouldn't use that term, but they are large demands. There's going to have to be some movement if negotiations aren't to be more than wasted words at this point. But let's look further. Now, there are multiple dams in Ukraine that could absolutely have catastrophic consequence. Firstly, there's one that sits just north of Kyiv and another one that sits in central Zaporizhia. So if we chuck back onto this map here, I think I can get rid of that. We can see where Kyiv is, and just to the north, we do have where then the power plant is here, I believe. It's hydroelectric, yes. So that one as well, many people speak of. But then if we keep moving down the Dnieper River, when we come to Zap, you can see there's a massive dam. I've driven across this one multiple times on the Dnieper right here as well. Of course, you can see where this is much, much more dry down to the south of here. So again, many people are speculating that could we see large attacks on them. Now, I don't know at this point in time, but if Russia can maintain its strategic bombing campaign that we are seeing against power stations at the moment, for everything from transformers, thermoelectric, everything, I believe that the next few months, where we'll see that then evolve into campaigns against bridges across the Dnieper River. Now, I'm still shocked that this hasn't been a priority targeting. The amount of bridges that run across, the lack of targeting of any of that, the ability to do that as well, as we have seen from Iskanders and Garans, etc. I'm so surprised we haven't seen more of a campaign against them, but I think that's how that will evolve over the coming months. Against the dams, I don't think so. Russia's got this weird needing to stay below a threshold of more support going into Ukraine, but enough of a threshold to have an impact so that can have then tactical success leading to strategic success on the front line, operational success in between. So that's difficult. Let's go down into Pokrovsk. Now, on the northern sector, what you'll see is Kucheriv Yar and to the east of Vilna coming under control of the Ukrainian forces, at least by the Ukrainian map. Today, I don't have a Syriac or AMK map to meet the threshold of this. Remember, if it is a Ukrainian map showing a Russian advance, we are more likely to believe that than a Ukrainian map showing a Ukrainian advance. Same if a Russian map shows a Russian advance, vice versa, you understand that, I am sure. So movement in here, but what we do know is that Ukraine has been pushing back this area. I wouldn't be surprised if it looks more like this. We have seen maps from reliable mappers showing Kushliv Yar and Zoloty Kolody as being more cleared by the Russian forces in here. Now, I don't particularly understand why Srizove is not shown in here in blue check. If we go back to yesterday and then to today, we do see some blue has popped up in here, but also the expansion of grey zone all around Pokrovsk, Minograd area. And this area is growing more and more critical, and this map probably does not represent the severity of what is actually happening down in here. I do have some geolocation to show you from this gentleman here, Ukrainian officer. We're indeed making progress on the Dobropilya front, that's the northern region, managed to completely eliminate the encircled enemy units. The trend there is quite good for now. Now, the elimination of these areas, what we've seen is several people taken POW, but remember, all the propaganda told us there were thousands in there. But the trend is quite good for now, but everything is far from ideal because we need to save Pokrovsk. If Pokrovsk falls, the same fate awaits Minograd. The problem is, if Pokrovsk falls, Minograd is in a really bad situation to try and pull forces out of. The pocket is quite large, and being there is not very pleasant. Logistics are failing to reach all areas. So even getting there is quite a challenging quest. And if we go even on the map that shows the best case scenario, from point to point, you've got a 5-kilometer gap at best sitting in here. Of course, this can be and likely is vertically enveloped by drones and artillery. But this map, I don't think, shows the whole story. Rodyanske, of course, is one of the ways to supply into here, but we do see grey zone moving into here. We have seen Russian forces today flying a unit flag, and that this is geolocated in Rodyanske on the eastern side. So, of course, building and further vice gripping down on Pokrovsk, Minograd. Pokrovsk will be the largest area to fall in likely 2 years. So keep an eye on the deterioration, the development in here. And when you hear these, everything's fine in here, everything is not fine in here. And the reason why this area has had success, I think, is more focusing on then working on these flanks first before we see a further push. And these forces need to somehow either have a withdrawal or some level of saviour, as that officer says, but we will see. Let's look at what Zelensky has said about this. Now, from Ukrainian media, Zelensky has refuted Russia's information about the encirclement of 5,000 servicemen in the Kupiansk and Pokrovsk direction, calling it a lie aimed at the US. He noted the enemy activity in these directions this week was lower, and Ukrainian troops are in control of the situation. So Zelensky's saying Ukraine's control of the situation here, although I can't find anyone who's actually there who says anything similar to that. Of course, we have seen information coming out of the Kremlin that there's 5,000, some are saying 10,000 troops surrounded in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. We know those situations in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk are very similar actually at the moment. How many troops is there? I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. We know at some points there would have been a lot, but of course, the amount of supply in and out and the attrition in here, it's likely a lot lower than it once was. So again, the amount in this, any figures, but the idea that there's not encirclement or envelopment in here and that it is just a Kremlin propaganda aimed at influencing the US, that is just completely incorrect. Again, what we do is flip it on its head. And if we saw this envelopment in another area, but it was Russians in here, what would people be saying? You wouldn't just call this a propaganda campaign. According to Zelensky, the purpose of such reports is to cause panic. But this time, the fake is aimed at the US to create the impression that Russia is allegedly winning. This is a complete lie and not the first one. So envelopment here, that's a complete lie, and there's to create the impression on Trump and the US that Russia is winning in this sector. Now, what I'll say is flip if this looked at the reverse here. Around Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, the idea that Russia is not winning is incredibly dangerous informational warfare that is leaning on information before it is on tactics and influencing them. He emphasized that the latest information from General Staff and General Alexander Syrsky, in particular, enemy activity near Kupiansk and Pokrovsk this week was 1.5 to 2 times lower than previous periods, likely getting ready for further pushes. He said Ukrainian troops control the situation, and such reports are nothing more than a Kremlin disinformation maneuver. So working on the flanks, treading down what we have seen be successful from Bakhmut to Avdiivka, etc., is Kremlin information. Okay, but let's look at what Syrsky has said as well. A day prior, Syrsky visited the Pokrovsk direction and emphasised commanders the inadmissibility of distorting information. He emphasised commanders the inadmissibility of distorting information reports, emphasising that dishonesty has a high price, the lives of soldiers. Something we've spoken about a lot, that there's more rosy reports sent back. But I think this, he doesn't say only more rosy. It may be sending up worse reports going into what Zelensky is saying about this like doomer attitude is causing then less support, Kremlin information. Again, the informational sphere is a weird batch. And so Syrsky noted during the discussion of the operational situation, the issue was about strengthening the stability of defence and preventing the advance of Russian troops. He emphasised that already given the relevant orders to increase effectiveness of the fight against drones and artillery. Once again, emphasised the commanders at all levels of inadmissibility of distorting, concealing information about the real situation in reports. Dishonesty has a high price, the lives of our soldiers. My first demand is truth, whatever it may be. A commander who hides the truth about the situation on the battlefield has no right to be a commander. I agree with Syrsky here, but are you saying that it's too rosy or too doomery? But also, instead of just saying that you shouldn't be a commander if you hide the truth, maybe go a little bit further and go, why may a commander be distorting information? Because we have seen before that commanders have then been in some trouble from reporting real information, not only from commanders. Maybe the map on the background that we show here might have got in some trouble when they showed too real of a situation in some areas. It's speculative, but we have got pretty good information that the things like that have occurred before, people losing positions. So instead of just saying, oh, these commanders are painting this picture, maybe ask why they are doing so. Let's have a look at some other areas on the maps. Now, we've spoken a little bit about Kupiansk. The Kupiansk situation is deteriorating as well. And one thing that we are seeing is a lot of footage like this. Now, this is not new, but footage like this isn't anything new, but this one is, I believe, from today, is a Russian FPV, likely a fiber optic drone, striking a Ukrainian tank. And we see in this footage both tanks and personnel taken out. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, what we see is these drones working around these cities. But something I've spoken about for some time is the heavy equipment that remains in Kupiansk, especially on the eastern side, or in Pokrovsk actual, or down in the south, as particularly in this area, to try and bring it back across the Oskil, how difficult that may actually be if there is a withdrawal out of here. We've brought that up several months ago of this pocket. It's going to be difficult if there is a withdrawal out of here to take that equipment, just like then Kursk was. Let's move our way down. Actually, no, let's move our way up. While I've got this on, there's a little bit of red check showing Russian advancement is in Volchansk. Remember, we did see a geolocation out into this sector. At least the grey zone has moved out into there. We have reports today that Russia is holding Ukrainian forces around Volchansk to try and draw them away from areas in the east. No surprise at all. That's exactly what Sumy is doing. It's exactly what our Odradne is doing as well. So, let's move our way down into the Velika Novosilka front line. We do see a healthy dose of grey zone heading up into Novu and Drivkia as well. And we do see there's a little area just in here, Privlilia as well. We do have a geolocation in here today, shown close as I can there, 4.4 k's back with a Russian flag being shown there. Again, it's difficult on this front just due to the porosity of the front line. There can be flags shown kilometres behind the line. But again, as I have said again and again, this Velika front is moving actually more quickly and is just day after day after day storming west. Why? Because there's fuck all fortifications to stop it at this point in time. That's why I bring up that linear warfare, bros, talking about Vuhledar, Zaporizhia. Maybe do your mathematic sums on that. Now, at this time of recording, there are large drone attacks heading into Russia. What we see today is, I believe this might be a Toyota Hilux, but more technicals like this. Of course, this is in the center of Moscow with a machine gun on it to intercept these drones. And we're seeing more and more of these technical machine gun crews like this. As drones become more and more relevant on the battlefield and more numerous, we're going back and everything's looking a little bit more like we've seen in areas in wars against terror. Very interesting to see. Of course, Ukraine has been doing this for some time, anti-drone teams. Russia is doing the same. There's this cat and mouse game between getting the drones high enough, then that they're outside of gun range, long enough, but then the guns, all of that. Not surprised to see that at all, but to actually intercept long-range drones is a bloody nightmare. Just the amount of them, the range they can go. Now, let's have a look at this new Russian system, because I guess I have to talk about it. So this is from Straight Arrow News. Russia successfully tested a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Video released showed Putin being told by Gerasimov, the General Chief of Staff, that the Burezhnesnik covered 8,500 miles, which is 14,000 kilometres. It's called the Skyfall by NATO. It spent 15 hours in the air. This unique product that no one else in the world possesses. Medvedev, he posted, congratulations to all Russia's friends on the successful test of unlimited range Burezhnesnik cruise missile with a nuclear engine and warhead. That's what's unique about this, is the engine on it itself is a nuclear engine. Of course, can go much further. According to Russian officials, it has unlimited range, can avoid US missiles, and US-based security organisation, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, said in 2019 that it could stay in the air for days. So, there's a little bit in this. So, firstly, I've actually cropped out a little bit of what I had written previously in this, but any development of systems like this, much like when car companies develop a prototype, can of course move into other industries. It's all about R&D. Now, they say some Western experts have questioned the strategic value. Now, the strategic value of this weapon is deterrence. But I do agree that I don't really see what it adds that Russia doesn't possess in other forms, but I'll give why I think this is being developed in a second. Now, they speak about that it may have radiation being leaked along its path, depending exactly how that engine works. But I will say, if these are ever used, radiation going at probably very low levels along its path are probably the least of your worries. It's probably more the warhead on the front of it. But I won't claim how I know it works. But the radiation along the path, this solely depends on whether it's an open or closed system. There were more open systems tested back in the Cold War amongst nuclear-powered aerial weapons, and then more closed systems developed further on. Modern systems are closed. Now, nuclear propulsion design, it's enabled much further for longer than traditional turbojet, would allow it to loiter. Nuclear Threat Initiative, US-based non-profit security organisation, non-profit, but would be getting massive money from, I'm guessing, Lockheed and then the US bloody Ministry of War, whatever they call it now. Could stay aloft for days, that it would carry a nuclear warhead or warheads, circle the globe at low altitude, avoid missile defences, dodge terrain and drop the warheads at difficult to predict location or on multiple locations. They say that the subsonic speed could make it detectable. They would be there to eliminate the remnants of any enemy command posts, military bases, factories and power plants after Russia had already fired its ICBMs, at which point the opponent's air defense system would be incapable of stopping them and trample the aggressive countries into the Stone Age. That's my read on this too. Institute study of strategic studies said it has 20,000 Ks. I think it would be likely much further than that if it is over days. They said its altitude was 50 to 100 meters, which is much lower than conventional cruise missiles, makes it harder for air defense radar to detect. That they have, that if they bring it successfully into service, it would give Moscow a unique weapon with intercontinental range capability, that it works by superheated and possibly radioactive air blasted out the back, that it has a poor test record, that at least 5 nuclear scientists were killed in an explosion back in 2019. So the way we have to look at these weapons and frame it is we need to look through the lens that this is doomsday, but it's also strategic Russian nuclear posturing too. That it's about deterrence, but also the R&D we spoke of. Now, I agree with this up here about that it would not be the first strike capability, not even return strike. It's a week on sort of strike. That what we know is in war games amongst great nuclear states, that in the first day, or first hours really, but the first days, launch sites, ships, satellites, many other assets are destroyed, badly damaged, just massive deterioration of any of your launch sites, your air defense, all of this. And the way to victory in a great state war like this is not who wins in those opening days, not at all. It's who can survive those opening days, who can rebuild some level of conventional military, who can mobilize, and who then can fight in the dark. Now, the way I see this system being used is as followed. If there is some nuclear launch, ICBMs go up, we're all fucked. But if there is some launch, this is fired up in the air with the opening salvos. So as the ICBMs, they take 10 minutes to reach targets, this goes up in the air, and what this does is it goes up into the Arctic somewhere where there's no fucking air defense and will just loiter around there for a number of days, maybe a week. Once these initial strikes and the dust settles, if you will, it'll reappear to then strike whatever is left over. So after those initial opening strikes and the massive deterioration of your existing, or your once existing capabilities. What I don't see is how this really backfills, because submarines, massive nuclear armed submarines, can do a similar job, especially around the poles in areas. So again, I guess you can have a lot more of these than you can submarines. So again, is it going to change anything in this war? No, I just thought it was something interesting to talk about, and also talk about these war games amongst it's not the opening strikes that are going to determine the war. It'll determine the rest of human history, but it won't determine the war. What will determine it is the weeks following. Who can rebuild, who can mobilize, who can move troops anywhere, what actually then occurs. And if these can loiter for a week and then mop up what is left over. If you think that China, Russia, America, Europe is going to have the same air defense a week on that it does in the opening days, you're dreaming. Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day. My voice is about to give out on me. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.